right. Hopefully everything should be fine. Okay. All right. So let's start. So we're looking at energy flow and nutrient cycling, right? So let's have a look at this. So let's do some review of some ecological terminology that everybody should completely understand already, right? So an ecosystem. Can anybody just tell me what's an ecosystem? From their standpoint, what's an ecosystem? Of course, it's a definition on screen, but let me know what an ecosystem is using your words. Anyone at all? Go ahead.
So I'll say, how I define it is that it's a dynamic system or which describes living organisms interacting with each other and their physical environment.
All right, lovely. Right, so we're looking at the interactions between biotic and abiotic factors. Okay, right, so we have that generally as what an ecosystem is. They're generally large, they're really complex, right? They can span as small as even a leaf, right, or a tree itself, right, and an entire rainforest. Both could be ecosystem. One is arboreal, right, and one is a general terrestrial ecosystem, right. We also have the human body, which is an ecosystem for millions of different bacteria from different families, right. Different Spirogyra, Pneumoniae, and Bacillus species. Our body's a host, right, for all those different types of bacteria as well, right? So those are generally what we call ecosystems, right? Habitats, now we know that the habitat is just a specific area in which an organism lives, right? Lives, finds shelters, obtains food, whatever the organism does, right? For the organism's well-being, it generally is within that specific environment, right? Whether it's arboreal, aerial, aquatic, terrestrial, so semi-aquatic, those type of areas, we should know that, right? So each species has its own habitat requirements. So some species would need more different types of soil types. Some species would need more trees more so than grasslands, right? Some species would need generally different requirements for their habitat. So therefore, many species live in different types of habitats. All right. A population. We know that population consists of all the individuals of a particular species living in a specific area. So as a population is. So if you have one tree cutter ant living on one tree, one random tree, right? Then all the numbers of these individual ants, right, would be called the population, right? So the population of a specific that would be the individuals, right? The number of individuals of the specific species living in an area, right? So they're generally characterized by size, density, distribution, age structure, right? So some of these things you guys would have looked at in section A of the CSET biology syllabus. All right. Community as well. The community now will be speaking about all the different populations put together, right? So all populations of different species interacting with each other within a particular ecosystem, which we just defined ecosystem. All right. So we have all of these different terminology that we must look at. An ecological niche as well, right? So the niche itself would be the particular interactions that an organism has or a species has, right? The specific role that the organism has to play within that environment, right? So it could be behavioral, physiological, morphological adaptations. These things can determine what the niche of the organism is, right? So we have all of these different things to take into account, right? Now let's look at food webs. So we know that a food web would be an intricate system of multiple food chains that take part within one ecosystem, right? So we have each food chain, right? And we're looking at combining the food chains together, right, to produce all possible pathways of nutrient flow within an ecosystem. That is what a food web is. All right, that's generally what a food web is. We have that there. So within the food web now, that's where we start to generally look at different trophic levels, right? When we start to look at food webs. So organisms in the food webs are grouped in categories called trophic levels. Roughly speaking, these levels are divided into producers, which is the first trophic level, consumers, and then decomposers, which is the last trophic level. Alright? So our producers know, right? So we know that our producers would generally be the ones that synthesize substances and introduce energy within the ecosystem itself, right? We're talking about different microscopic producers such as seaweeds and general plants and trees, etc. Grasses, those are our macroscopic producers. We also have aquatic producers such as phytoplankton, right, which are completely abundant within my marine ecosystems, right. So generally within an ecosystem, we have an allotrophic species, right? It can be from anywhere. It can be bacteria. It can be um general eukaryotic of autotroph, right? That introduces nutrients, right, or energy within the ecosystem, right? So we're looking at that. So the producers have the unique ability to synthesize their own substance. Therefore, the producers must be autotrophic, right? In some way, whether it be photo or non-photo, it has to be autotrophic, right? So, for instance, bacteria thriving in extreme environments, right? These are what we call our extremophiles, right? And our heliophiles and those type of things. When you start to do level one microbiology at the university level, we're going to be speaking about these things, right? So, such as active volcanic regions, right, utilize sulfur rather than our carbon dioxide for their chemosynthesis, right? So, our sulfonobacteria, right? So, our sulfonobacter, right? These different types of species would be the producers in those environments. So it's not just the general humble plant that is the only producer, right? Then we have our consumers. Our consumers generally will speak to our heterotrophs, right? So for example, our consumers, right, tend to be our herbivores, our carnivores, right? So generally they are omnivores, right? They're a mixture of omnivores, right? So our consumers will either prey on the producers, right, or prey on other consumers. And we have different types of producers for that. Our primary consumers would be the ones that are herbivorous in nature, right? So, for example, elephants, right, bears, right, mice would basically graze on grasses, shrubs, and trees, right? Herbivorous fish and turtles, right, would nourish themselves on different types of kelp and seagrasses and those type of stuff, right? So our primary consumers would be the ones that consume the producers. Our secondary consumers would now be the third trophic level. So our producers are the first, our primary consumers are the second, then our third trophic level now would be our secondary consumers, right? Which will now prey on the herbivores, right? Many times, when we look at sea biology, this is just generally tends to be where the food chain ends, right? But our web is more complex than that. Alright? So we have tertiary consumers now, alright, which is our fourth trophic level, generally, right? So they feed on secondary consumers specifically. So the food chain may extend further and further and further to the fifth and the sixth and the seventh and the 100th trophic level until we reach what we call a culminating predator or a apex predator, right? Which situates themselves at the topmost trophic level and the prey on other consumers without natural predators, right? So lions in grasslands, right, grassland ecosystems, they would be an example of an apex predator. A great white shark, right, within the general oceans, within the lower Atlantic and the Pacific, right? They're really frequent there. Right, bobcats are mountain lions in deserts are examples of apex predators within their own ecosystem. They occupy the highest trophic level. Alright? We have the detritivores and decomposers now, right? So the detritivores and decomposers made up the last part of our food chain. Detritivores are organisms that eat non-living plants and animals, right? For example, scavengers such as vultures, right? And beetles, these are detritivores, right? But our decomposers now will be our fungi and our bacteria, right? That complete an entire food chain, right? So they would turn organic wastes, such as decomposing plants, into inorganic material, right? such as nutrient-rich soil. So they complete the circle of life itself. All right. So they return these nutrients now to the primary, to the producers per se. Right. So we have that there. So we have producers, then our general consumers, our primary consumers are herbivoric, right? Or herbivores rather, right? Then our secondary and tertiary consumers can be carnivore, will be carnivores or omnivores, and then it can go up to whatever level, but the highest trophic level there generally would now be occupied by the apex predator, right? And then we have the tritivores and decomposers, which wrap up the entire thing, right? That feed on dead material, okay? So these are generally the trophic levels here. So producers, primary consumers, etc. are going up. Alright, everything here should be fine. And then usually in our trophic levels we don't really show the digitivores and decomposers though. Alright? Because they're hard to measure. As we will look at pyramids of number and pyramids of biomass and etc. Right? It's really hard to really place the digitivores and decomposers there, right? Well, is it really hard? Not necessarily, right? But it's not normally placed there. Alright? Energy transfer and efficiency. So efficiency of energy transfer between the trophic levels, right? So we know that energy is transferred between the different trophic levels, right? Within the food chain or food web, right? So there's loss of energy at every step, and the efficiency of energy transfer refers to the proportion of energy passed from one trophic level to the next, right? What is generally the portion? What's the portion that we see? How much energy is transferred from one trophic level to the other? That's a question.
Like 10%.
Like 10%.
10%.
So it's generally there. Really and truly, it's 5 to 20%, but we just said 10% to simplify, right? 10%, right? If it's going to be any percent, it's going to be 10%, right? So typically, only a fraction, which is generally 10%, of the energy available at one trophic level will be transferred to the next. A majority of the energy will be lost and utilized in metabolic processes. This phenomenon is governed by the law of thermodynamics as well as ecological principles. So look at the law of conservation of energy and stuff like that. And if 10% of energy is transferred, where there's the energy gone, it can't just disappear, right? So it must be lost through sub-metabolic processes, right? So we generally have typically a range from 5 to 20% of the energy being transferred between trophic levels. We generally say 10 at this level, right? So this means that only a small percentage of energy is available to the other trophic level, right? For example, if a primary producer, an autotroph, captures 100 units of solar energy through photosynthesis, only about 5 to 20 units, or in our case 10 units, right, of energy may be passed to the primary consumer, which is a herbivore that consumes the autotroph, right? So that should be very clear. I don't think anybody should have an issue with that at all. It should be very clear, right? So where does the unaccounted energy go? So I should say does, not where it dies. Okay, that's a very huge blunder there. Right? But where does it go? So we have respiration and metabolism. So organisms in each trophic level will have a need to use energy for metabolic processes, right? So whether it's the plants with their photosynthesis, whether it's the omnivores and herbivores and carnivores with their respiration, right? So all of these, right, things will be used. So respiration, growth, reproduction, all of these bodily functions use energy. So it's lost there. Converted to heat in other forms of metabolic waste and other forms of metabolic waste as well. But generally, heat loss as well. Organisms dissipate heat to the surrounding, contributing to thermal energy in the ecosystem. Right? So organisms itself dissipate heat. Incomplete digestion and assimilation as well. Not all the energy consumed by the organism is digested and assimilated efficiently. So some of it is excreted as undigested food and waste products. Right? We also have movement and activity. The simple locomotion that we're having within our bodies are using energy, ATP, for the inflection of the different joints, right? Locomotion, foraging, and hunting. When organisms do these things, they will lose energy. And we also have general life processes and maintenance, right? So the maintaining body temperature, right? Repairing tissues, right? Homeostasis itself requires energy. So through homeostatic uses, right, we lose energy as well. So we can see how many different ways we will use up the energy or lose the energy. So only around 5 to 20, or in our case 10%, of the energy will be transferred to the next trophic level. All right. Any questions or concerns before we move on to biological pyramids concept?
Oh, sir, this is Unit 2, right?
Unit 2, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So the biological pyramids, now we have pyramids of number, which is the first one that the syllabus asked us to look at. All right. So these show the numbers of organisms at each trophic level in a food chain. All right. Generally, all pyramids tend to do that. Right. But what's the difference with the pyramid of numbers now? Right. The width of the bar represents the numbers using a linear or logarithmic scale, or bars may be purely qualitative, right? So numbers should be normalized for a given area of a terrestrial habitat. Let's say we're using an as basic area, right? Or a volume for a marine habitat, right? So if we're using a terrestrial habitat, we're going to be using an area. If we're using a marine habitat, we're going to be using a volume, right? So whatever is in the area, right, that's what we're going to count, right? We did something like this before when we used the quadrant in CSET biology, right? And the volume itself would be used for marine habitats, right? So pyramids of numbers are most often triangular, right? They're generally a pyramid shape, right? So why is this? The producers themselves tend to be typically the most numerous organisms within the environment, right? And then the number of organisms will decrease as we go up the trophic level. So in this case now in A, we have generally, let's say, a small amount of owls. We have more mice than an owl. We have more snails than the mice. We have more grass than the snails. So looking at the numbers there, how much of the thing is present within a given area of the ecosystem, right? So it's generally pyramid shape, but let's say in this case, right, an arboreal ecosystem, right? Arboreal speaks to the tree, so we're only speaking about a tree. The tree is the sole producer, which caterpillars feed on, and then we have some butterflies, right? So in this case, the blue tits are some butterflies, right? That will well, not some butterflies, rather, some birds that will feed on the caterpillars, right? So we have this shape as well for the pyramid of numbers, and we have even this shape, right? The rose bush, we have a number of aphids and parasites would feed on the aphids, right? So these are pyramids of number, all right? Everything should be fine here, right? No questions? All right. It seems to me that there are no issues here with pyramids of number. We're just talking about how much of what is in the ecosystem, and then we draw the pyramid depending on the trophic levels. All right. That's what we're doing. For biomass now, let me just define biomass here. It's very important to define biomass before we reach the pyramids. Speaking about biomass specifically, right? So it refers to the total mass of living organisms, right? So the mass of all organisms present. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the plants from the ecosystem. We're going to take their general mass, their regular wet weight, which basically means that they contain the water, and then we're going to burn them off, combust them to produce dry weight, right? So we can look at how pyramids of biomass, right? When we look at pyramids of mass, right, it changes depending on whether or not you have the dry weight of the substance or the wet weight of the substance, right? So we're looking at the total mass of living organisms, including plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms, right? So the biomass represents the energy stored within the biological organisms, right? So let's have a look at this. So pyramids of biomass display a little bit more information since they consider the total mass of living organisms, or the biomass, at each trophic level. The biomass should be dry mass, right? So the dry mass being stored, right? So no water is there. So we must always combust to remove all the liquids, right? So the dry mass can be measured, right? And it's measured in kilograms per square meter, right? That is what it's measured in. So the biomass may be found by dry or weighing the organism at each trophic level, or by counting them and multiplying by an average individual mass, right? So pyramids of biomass are always pyramid shaped, right? Since if a trophic level gains all the mass from the level below, then it cannot have more mass, right, than the level right above it, right? So we're looking at that. So what we're saying is here that we can't have more mass than the level that you eat, right? So if we look at the predation between birds and ladybugs, right? Right. So the amount of birds cannot really have higher general mass than the amount of ladybugs within the environment when you look at the mass itself, right? The biomass within the ecosystem, right? So because there's a higher number, they would have a higher mass there, right? For the rosebush versus the aphids now, the rosebush itself will always have a higher mass than the collective amount of aphids that live on the rosebush. We're looking at the masses, right? Okay, so the missing mass which is not eaten by consumers becomes detritus and is decomposed. So looking at everything that is transferred through the ecosystem itself or through the trophic levels rather than everything that is not. So pyramids of biomass generally right take this shape. Alright. Pyramids of energy now. We're looking at the fact that only around 10% of the energy is transferred through the trophic levels, right? So we're looking at this. Pyramids of energy show how much energy flows through each trophic level at a given time in the units usually provided here, right? So generally we use a year, right? So kilojoules per meter per year, right? We generally use that, right? So we have this here. So within this ecosystem now, we know that the rose will have 100% of the energy from the sun. Only 10% will go onto the aphids. Only 10% of that will go onto the ladybugs. And only 10% of that will go onto the birds. So this is how the pyramid of energy will always look. Alright? Will always look like this because of the fact that we know how much energy is always transferred, right? Let me see the chat. Somebody texted something. For biomass, even what is not eaten is counted. Okay, so for biomass, right, we have missing mass, right? So what is not eaten, right, by the consumers is known as just generally missing mass, right? So basically, everything from the rose bush that is not eaten, right, would be the missing mass. How we're looking at how the mass, right, is transferred through the ecosystem, right? So if it's not eaten, it's not counted within the higher trophic levels, but it's counted for the rose bush itself. So if it is not transferred, it is not counted. Alright? So it's something like that. So the energy flow in ecosystems, there are three things can happen to the energy taken. So we'll look at how the energy taken can change as well, right? So it can be passed on to the biomass or the next trophic level in the food chain when the organism is eaten. It can become stored in detritus, right? What detritivores, right? So this energy is passed on to the decomposers when the detritus decays, right? Then it can be converted into heat by all these different types of, metabolic processes, right? So if we have a look at this diagram, it would be lovely, right? So we have solar energy itself, heat is absorbed, right, by the producers, right? In this case, now, heat absorbed by non-green plants as well, with the non-green parts, rather. It's not really non-green. We know that plants themselves don't have to be green. We eliminated that fallacy years ago, right? But everything that is not photosynthetic is just going to be lost to the environment like that. You know that. It's not going to be absorbed into the ecosystem, therefore. So that's going to be lost, right? So chemical energy in the producers now can be stored as chemical energy, right? So what's happening now, right? Once it's eaten, right, by the primary consumer, that will be transferred, right? If there's any type of metabolism, then it will be lost as heat, right? If nothing really happens to it and it just dies, right? When it dies, it's gonna be detritus, basically waste or dead parts, right? So that's what's happening throughout all of these, right? So if it is eaten, it moves to the next trophic level, right? Through metabolic processes, lost as heat to space, right? And when it dies, it becomes detritus, right? So we're generally looking at those type of things. For the top consumers now, right? Remember that nothing is there for apex predators, right? Therefore, nothing will be consumed. That means that all the energy within our apex predators will be lost to heat and then lost to detritus when they die, right? And then all the decomposers now will take that chemical energy from detritus, right, and transfer it to heat, and it will propagate out to space, right? So we're looking at that. So this is how the energy is cycled, or the energy is flowing, rather. It's not a cycle. It's flowing through the ecosystem. All right. So it's an integral diagram here. So all of what is dead ends up being turned into energy by the decomposers anyways, and now being sent through to space. What I mean by to space, mean actual space. The Earth loses heat, right? The Earth does lose heat. But when these organisms continue to lose heat, and then we have all sorts of chlorofluorocarbons trapping the heat inside, then it will increase the heat, global warming, yeah, da 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 da, full stop, right? But generally, the heat should be released to space. So that's the flow of energy. It's not a cycle, but energy flows through the ecosystem, and that is how it flows through the ecosystem. That is the essence behind the first part of this topic. All right. So the next thing that we're going to go through is the nutrient component. Right. I included in this as well, right? The terms bioaccumulation and biomagnification as well. I'm not sure if there's something that you guys look at. Do you guys look at bioaccumulation and biomagnification?
Sir, you asked a question, sir?
Yeah, do we look at it? At bioaccumulation and biomagnification.
If we need to look at it?
If you looked at it. If it is Do you need to look at it? Let me ask that.
Oh, I do. Well, people are saying no.
Okay, no. Alright. But bioaccumulation is something that you look at in CSEC, so if you don't remember, whatever, if it's not required in the syllabus, it basically means that any type of pollutants being eaten throughout the ecosystem, right? As if a producer has that contaminant, then the entire ecosystem the entire food chain will be affected, right? So the contaminant will travel through. Basically, if you pollute the area and the fish eat the pollutants, then you eat the fish, you get the pollutants. That's what bioaccumulation is really about. And biomagnification is basically about the increasing in contaminant levels, right? So that's really what it's talking about. So bioaccumulation over time, right? Once you eat, you're going to go through trophic level, increase the amount of pollutants within you, right? And for the contaminant level within bioaccumulation, the further up you are in the trophic level, right, the more contaminants you will consume. That's basically what it's talking about. Right, but if it's not really required, that's fine. So the importance of energy flow now, right? Energy flow is important for driving primary production. So energy flow initiates the capture of solar energy in the primary producers, right? Supporting trophic relations. So energy flow allows for energy to move through higher and higher trophic levels, right? It maintains the trophic levels concepts, right? It regulates population dynamics as well, right? So the energy availability influences population dynamics by determining the carry capacity of the ecosystem and the abundance of organisms within each trophic level. So notice how as you go up the trophic levels, the number of organisms gets considerably less. And we can note that through pyramids of number, right? Generally in this case, section A here, that pyramid of number there, right? We can note that. So generally the organisms through higher trophic levels become considerably less, right? So in that case now, it can regulate the amount of energy within that the ecosystem itself can hold, right? So adequate energy flow supports population growth, while fluctuations in energy availability can impact population size and distribution. All right. So it also drives biological processes. So the energy flow can allow for the organisms to really go through metabolism and etc. Right. So all different types of body processes. It sustains ecosystem functions as well. Right. So the flow of energy supports ecosystem functions such as nutrient cycling, decomposition, soil formation, right? These different stuff. So we know that detritivores and decomposers will utilize energy in order to cycle nutrients as well. And that's the next thing that we're going to look at, nutrient cycling, right? We also have the enhancing the resilience of an ecosystem. The balance of energy flow enhances ecosystem resilience by promoting stability and adaptability in the face of environmental changes and disturbances. So we're going to get into that as well within biodiversity. And that's really it for the energy flow component, all right? That's really for the energy flow component. As for the nutrient flow component,